But now to the big story of the day, and it's been said before, right, that Rod Stewart, who for those of you watching on YouTube used to be a singer and a tax exile, used some of his millions to pay a little while ago for some MRI scans in his hometown of Harlow in Essex. And at the time, he gave interviews saying the COVID backlogs need easing, and during these interviews, he said that the nurses should be paid more for the jobs that they do. Now, he's gone a step further, Jason, here, and he says that in an interview yesterday, he seems to have said that he supports the nurses' strikes wholeheartedly. This isn't what Rishi Sunak is going to want to hear from someone who was a fairly high-profile Tory supporter, and he can command the front pages like this. This isn't helpful, is it?
What the most important thing here, to my mind, Susie, is not that it's a famous name saying this. It's Rod Stewart, 78, it's his age. This is what's so fascinating. He is not alone in being a lifelong Tory voter who is now disenchanted with the Conservatives. The bulk of the Conservative support, overwhelmingly at the last two elections, was the over 65s. They were more likely to vote Conservative than anything else. Yeah, and the Tories rely on older voters to win. If they don't have them, they can't win the next election. So when Sir Rod and others of his age bracket are turning against the Tories, then the Conservatives should really start to be panicking, because if they've lost them, they haven't got a base.
No, exactly. Now, and of course, what do you think, everybody? Get into the questions, okay? Get into the comments and let us know. Do you think Rod Stewart's right? Do you think he's indicative, as Jason suggests, there of other 78-year-olds who have realised, people who grew up with the NHS, perhaps, and the early days of the NHS, and you just see there is absolutely no argument about this, that you just pay the nurses more, and that's that. We've got a 48-hour nurses' strike next week, Jason. The government is trying to move away from clapping for carers and clamping them in irons instead, because they're taking it to court and insisting that strike is illegal because it's exceeded the mandate that they got 6 months ago. But Rod says, I'm well on their side. I was absolutely with them. He said they come before anything. And he says they were absolutely right to down tools. If rich old Tories like Rod are saying it, how long... I suppose it's the same question you've just answered in a way, but how long is it going to take for the rich young Tories in government to realise that this is major? This isn't just Rod Stewart, like you say. It's millions of other people who are going to feel the same way.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. They've gone from clapping them to clapping them in irons. It's like with this court case. But I mean, these things are always delicate, and moods can swing very quickly. But the Conservatives, when this industrial dispute started, were still kind of under this illusion of like they're rerunning the kind of winter of discontent, which we'll come on to because it's referred to by John Bercow in his article as well in the Mirror today. And they thought that by standing up and being tough against the unions, it would be an automatic vote winner. What has kind of surprised them and kind of and caught them kind of off guard is actually the public have sided with the industrial action and have not taken the Tory line. And the polls are showing, I mean, it slightly depends on the dispute, but it's definitely in the case of the nurses and with the teachers, that the majority support them going on strike for a pay rise, and they feel they deserve a pay rise. Yeah. And that's what's so interesting.
As Mike points out there, he says the health secretary has meanwhile announced he is suing the nurses that he used to clap. This doesn't strike me as in keeping with the public mood, largely in favour of paying NHS staff their worth. Rod has even said that he wants to pay for more MRI scans. He could do 30 or 40 a day by paying for an MRI unit, which he is happy to afford to do, which, seeing as he left the country, I think back in the 70s or 80s, in order to stop paying so much tax, is jolly decent of him. But he said it's like banging your head against a brick wall. People are crying out for them and I can't get anybody to do it. What? Why not, Jason? If someone is offering to pay for the MRI scans that are diagnostic, that help people get the treatment they need in the right time and everything else, why aren't people biting his arm off to do this? Why aren't the NHS Trust saying, over here, please, Rod, we could do with one? Are they all just too busy striking, or have they had some kind of political order not to take his very outspoken help? Or am I being cynical?
I don't know the answer to that question, Susie, at all. I don't understand the inner workings of NHS management. It's all mystery to me. I'm afraid.
I suspect it's probably a combination of not quite knowing how that pay chain would work, how the paperwork would come through, and also perhaps not wanting the interviews outside your hospital, because that's what would happen, isn't it?
I think what it does feed into, which is kind of something I have from various conversations with my mother, who's more or less the same age as Sir Rod, is this kind of real frustration that nothing seems to work properly. And you talk to people and they're trying to get GP appointments and they can't get them, and they're trying to get public transport somewhere and it doesn't seem to work, and then. It's when they want a dentist appointment, but you can't find an NHS dentist, and it just goes on. And I think that's real kind of just like people are just kind of constantly battling for services which used to be provided very efficiently, and I think that's kind of partly what kind of Rod has tapped into. Why aren't there MRI scans? Why has it got to this situation? But it's much bigger than that. It's across the board of every form of public service. In some way, it seems to be kind of either broken or so much worse than it was when the Conservatives came to power 13 years ago.
Exactly. Everything's got a pothole in, isn't it? Effectively, every public service in some way has been allowed to go to rack and ruin and just rot. The weather gets in it and it gets worse and worse. Lindsay says, I'm an old fart. No, you're not, Lindsay. To me, the NHS is the one jewel in the crown this country has left, and kill it off at your peril. I think so, Lindsay, and that is definitely the comment of the day. So get into my messages and you will get the News Agenda mug. You just give me your address. Kirsty from the other day didn't bother to get in touch with me, so she hasn't got her mug. So, Lindsay, please message me and we'll sort one out for you. This is part of the problem, isn't it, I think, Jason, because, back in the 70s, the last big wave of industrial action that we had, the 70s and the early 80s. And again, my parents would tell you the same kind of thing was happening. Nothing was working. You couldn't get a train. You couldn't make a phone call. The bills were going through the roof, inflation, blah, 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 all the rest of it. And it was strike, industrial action all the time. The whole country being ground to a halt. Labour was in power. Labour got the blame. And the unions got the blame. And the general public view, if you weren't in a union, was that it just wasn't terribly good. But now, fast forward 40 odd years, and we've got strikes. Everything's not working. You can't catch a train. Everything's potholed. The country seems to be going down the tubes. But the Tories have been in power for 13 years. And so the public have got quite a high level of support for the strikers this time round. And it's because blame is being apportioned differently, I think, isn't it? The same problems in a way, but we've tried nationalisation and it wasn't working in the 70s, and we've tried privatisation and now that's gone to hell as well. And there's just this general sense that we'd like the other guys to take over now and try it differently.
I mean, Ronald Reagan won the 1980 presidential election by asking the very simple question, do you feel better off than you did 4 years ago? And people said, no, they didn't. Inflation was soaring. Jimmy Carter had been a disappointment. And Labour's now asking the same question, do you feel better off 13 years ago? And 13 years is a lot longer to feel worse off, aren't they? And the Tories don't have an answer to that question. And until they do, it's going to be very hard to see how they can win the next general election.
Yeah, because the only people they can blame are civil servants and go, well, it's not our fault. We've tried to do it. We've just been stopped by the lawyers and the podcasters and the liberal media elite, and it's all somebody else's fault.
Well,
it's running the country.
It's toffle-eating woke activists who are responsible for the decline of this country, not the people in charge.
Yes, they've gone
out.
The
new elite, they're responsible, Susie. It's people like you and me, the new elite. We're responsible.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm very elite, being a single parent, state educated, mild disability. Yeah, that's me. It's my fault, everybody. Sorry, I've been personally stopping Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak all this time. Maybe they read my columns and decided that they read it and get so depressed they go, there's no point today, I'm staying in bed. Maybe if only that had actually happened, things might have gone a bit easier. Now, Rod's not the only one to turn his coat on this particular issue. And as Jason mentioned earlier, the case of former Speaker John Bercow, this isn't even the first time he's done it. Now, he's written in the paper today about how he became a Tory in the winter of discontent. And I suppose he's in his 60s, isn't he? I think maybe early 70s now. He's coming into Rod Stewart's age bracket a bit, although he's younger quite a bit, although probably about the same height. Horrified at all the strikes in the 70s, became a Tory, but now he's saying he's supportive of all these strikes and thinks they're 100% right to down tools while, as he calls it, defending themselves against a government that is hell-bent on cutting their pay. Now, Jason, is Sir John's intervention going to mean as much as Rod's? Is it indicative of a certain age bracket in the same way, or is this just John Bercow being John Bercow?
Well, I've just Googled while you were speaking, but he's 60, so that's very good.
Sorry, John. Sorry, John.
Young John Bercow. There's a slight problem with John Bercow, is that obviously he got badly censored for allegedly bullying behaviour. Yeah.
Yeah.
So his reputation is not, as good as it could be, which slightly undermines everything he says. But it's still fascinating that somebody who was very much on the right of the party when he joined the Conservatives, he was in the kind of, the hanging and flogging kind of clique of the Tories, has moved so far, and has seen the light, so to speak. And obviously we welcome all sinners and repenters.
Yes, well, it's welcome, of course, that he's changed his tune, and it's someone else, I suppose, which the Tories aren't going to particularly welcome having that news.